A start. It's gone past. Welcome to the joint meeting of the Pensions Subcommittee and Pensions Board, the meeting on Thursday the 24th of May 2018. Can we have SEDERUNT and apologies for the Pensions Subcommittee, please, Claire?
Thank you, Chair. We have 4 Pension Sub members present currently that we are quoted. Councillor Murray will be along shortly. There's a number of apologies from Councillor Wilson, Councillor Carruthers, Councillor McClellan, Councillor McComb, and I believe Councillor Ronnie is also an apology.
Okay, thank you. And could we have SEDERUNT and apologies for the Pension Board?
Thank you, Chair. There's 2 board members present, Councillor McKee and David Stainthorpe. The board currently isn't quorate. There's all the other board members are apologies.
Okay, thank you. We've already set a precedence before for the Pension Board, even though they're not quorate, but they're more than welcome to stay. Is there any declarations of interest from the Pension Subcommittee? No. Any declarations of interest from the Pensions Board? No. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to number 5 on the agenda, the Investment Strategy Review Report by Head of Finance and Procurement, and I'll pass on to Paul.
Thank you, Chair. At the last meeting of this committee, members received the results of the triennial valuation of the fund up to March 2017. As part of the discussion on that item, we outlined that it's recognised good practice to follow up the triennial valuation with a full detailed review of the fund's investment strategy. It's a wee bit unfortunate that we're quite low in numbers today, because I think this really is one of the key decisions for this committee. But we set out in the report how we're looking to take this forward. If you look at paragraph 4.1 of the report, what we're saying is that this is very much a 2-stage process. The first stage, which is what we're looking at today, is a look at the high-level allocation or split between return-seeking assets and lower-risk assets, and that's really what we're focusing on today. The second stage, which we'll look to bring to the next committee, would be a more detailed look at individual asset allocations. That's a split between UK and overseas equities, property, government and corporate bonds, and at that stage we'd also look at things like active versus passive management, and also review our individual managers as part of that. So I said that's the key focus for today. We've been working with Hymans Robertson in terms of some of the options with regard to that, and Paul and Jamie are here today to take us through a detailed presentation on that. Members have received that presentation in advance, so hopefully you've had an opportunity to review that and give it some consideration beforehand, but obviously Paul and Jamie will take us through that in a bit more detail. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. We're going to be going through this slide presentation here, review of investment strategy. Do interrupt as we go through today if there's things that don't make sense or that you object to or want to challenge. I mean, do make it quite interactive. That will be that will be good. I've got with me today Jamie McLaughlin, who works with me on the Dumfries Fund. And has also been involved in some of the modelling, so he'll be taking us through some of that as well. If I can just take you on to slide 3, just briefly what we're going to cover today. I'll just say a bit at the start about the process we're going through in terms of reviewing the strategy and the asset allocation and the detail of the investment arrangements. We'll talk a little about the kind of the high-level objectives of the fund. What are we trying to achieve for the pension fund as a whole? Jamie will give an explanation of what asset liability modelling is, basically. You will have had some carried out in relation to the actuarial valuation, but just a reminder really of what's going on there, and then we'll look at the analysis and results that relate to this particular fund, and then we'll conclude with a kind of interpretation of those results and recommendations as to how we take things forward. If I can just take you to slide 4, I'd reiterate the point that Paul made. We do think of setting the investment strategy in 2 distinct stages. And what we're focusing on today is this high-level decision for the strategy. So what kind of level of risk should we be taking with the investments? And what kind of target return do we have in mind? So that's very much based on the long-term funding objectives. We work quite closely with the actuaries, who obviously set the contribution strategy. And what we've highlighted in green there is this fundamental split. There's two types of assets in the pension fund. There are assets that involve a degree of investment risk, and you own them because you expect to earn a good return from owning them. So you take that risk because you hope that will then contribute towards funding the scheme. The other types of assets are there really just to control the risk. So on the left-hand side, assets that have produced growth or very high levels of income are what we call return-seeking assets. And on the right-hand side, things like government bonds and corporate bonds, essentially there just to control the amount of risk we're taking. And it's that kind of high-level split that we'll be talking about today. And once we've got a decision on that high-level split, that enables us then to go on to stage 2, which will be to drill down into the detail of exactly how the allocations split between UK and global equities, into property, into different types of bond, any other asset classes. But until we've got the sort of the high-level framework, we don't want to go into the nitty-gritty. It's this stage 1 decision that tends to have the biggest impact over time on the funding position of the fund. But the proposal is that we come to the next meeting with a report that details these kinds of issues that we've highlighted in stage 2 here. And just in terms of those various decisions, they're often referred to as kind of strategy and structure. You can think of high-level strategy as being how do we broadly want to allocate the assets into different types of buckets. And stage 2 is really concentrating on these blue bars on the right-hand side, the actual detailed structure of the arrangements, which we won't go into in detail today. And just a reminder before we look at some of the analysis that, it's important to remember there are only 2 ways of funding the benefits from the scheme. You either pay cash in terms of contributions, or you earn money on investment returns. And they're the only 2 sources of funding those benefits. And you have some control over both of those. You set the contributions in conjunction with the actuary, and you set the investment strategy with a certain target return. You don't have much control over the money going out on the right-hand side. The benefit payments are largely set. You can control the expenses to an extent, but they're very small in terms of the money coming out. So your main levers are the 2 orange bars on the left-hand side. And just in terms of what the objectives of the fund are in the next section, we've included on slide 8 a projection of the cash flow position of the fund, because your objective, of course, is to meet all the benefit payments falling due in all the years going forward. We include this chart of cash flow just to give an idea of how relevant that is to setting the strategy. Just to explain this rather kind of multicoloured chart, the bars represent the total benefit payments that you're expected to need to pay out over the next 25 years to different categories of member. In terms of contributions coming in, on the assumption that people leaving the scheme will be replaced by people joining the scheme, i.e. a kind of 100% replacement ratio of members, the cash you would see coming in is represented by the red line there. So to the extent that that line is below the benefits going out, that implies that on a month-to-month basis or a year-to-year basis, you've got more going out than coming in. Now, that's not unusual for pension schemes. In fact, in the private sector, every single scheme is really in that position. But for local authority schemes, that's quite new, because historically, you tended to have more money coming in each month than going out, and that will get put out to the investment managers. But one of the big changes in local authority schemes has, many are now in a position where they have more going out each month than money coming in. And so we need to have an idea of how relevant that is, because one of the things we'll talk about later is what we call income assets, which is those assets that rely on a fairly high level of income to get their return. And this is just a flag that getting income from the investments is going to become more important for the fund in the future. Now, not to panic you, what this cash flow doesn't include in terms of money coming in is income from your current investments. So you've got a portfolio of 850 million. You're earning income on that of 2.5% a year. So there's about £20 million of income being generated, but most of that is probably still being reinvested. If you took all of that income out from all of the investments, you'd have another £20 million a year coming in. So actually what's happening is funds are having to make sure that they can get more of the income that they're automatically generating rather than having it automatically invested. So that's a kind of sense check that we use at the start just to see what the cash flow position is. And just on slide now, when you have a deficit in the fund, your objective really is to get that deficit closed and to get the fund into a fully funded position. So you're paying in deficit contributions and you're taking a level of investment risk, which together should get you back to a fully funded position. Now, the long-term objective we've used for the modelling is consistent with what was also used for the modelling for the actuarial valuation, which was to look ahead 20 years and say, our aim is to get this fund to a fully funded position and to stay there. So when we're looking ahead, what we've said is what are the chances of being fully funded in the long term? And we've used a 20-year period. Yep.
Joe, could you put your microphone on, please? Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot about that. On page 8, the existing member contribution is greatly reducing from about 25 down to under 10 over, is that a 25-year period?
Yes. That is because current members will retire. So if you had nobody coming into the scheme, if you had no new members, and you were just looking at the contributions from current members, as they retire, you get less cash from them. Because each year, some of those members have gone, so you're getting fewer contributions off them.
You're working on the basis of existing members and not being replaced when they retire?
Well, the black line is if you just look at the current membership today, the money coming from them will decline as they retire, but to the extent that they are replaced on a one-to-one basis by people joining the scheme, then the total who will start paying money in instead, the total money coming in will be the red line. But it shows how sensitive that is to this new entrant assumption. If you have fewer people coming into the fund than are leaving, you end up somewhere between that red and that black line, and the fund becomes heavily cash negative. So that's quite an important assumption. I think the history in recent years has been people have been joining the scheme at the same rate as leaving. But if that doesn't continue, then funds such as yourselves, become quite deeply cash negative quite quickly. And if there's any decision to stop new members joining the scheme for whatever reason, it has, we have to come back to this strategy and seriously rethink it.
Malcolm?
Thanks, Chair. Just to go back to that, with the way trends are moving with staff in the council, as has happened over the last few years, and I'm not sure how realistic it is that we're going to have the same number of people coming in as leaving. I think that is going to be a big pressure, I think, going forward.
Yeah, and it's an assumption that gets challenged, I think, as part of the valuation process as well. I mean, to be honest, a lot of councils said, we are cutting staff, that can't be true. But at the same time, staff at other employers within the fund have been rising elsewhere. I don't know the detail of it. And also you've had auto-enrolment, which has brought a lot of new people into the fund as well. So the raw data seems to show that actually people have been coming in at the same rate as they've been leaving. Now, it might not go on forever, and it feels surprising that it's been happening that way at all, but the data suggests it hasn't. But yeah, each valuation you go through as well, that's quite an important assumption, and it comes up in those discussions as well as to whether that's realistic going forward. But it's quite important for it has quite big implications if that stops being the case.
Sorry, Paul, David Steinthorpe.
Thank you. The 2 points, the starting points, the red and black line are in the same place. Now, I would have been kind of assuming that the turnover, which you're saying is likely to be the same or forecast to be the same, has been the same over the past 25 years. I know we're looking forward now, but so if that was if that is correct, that the staffing levels or the number of pensions have stayed broadly similar over the past 25 years, and the starting point now is at the same place, why is there such a diversion over the next 25 years of these two lines?
Well, what that's saying in year one, and the figures are approximate in a way. What that's saying in year one is you've got about 25 million coming in from current people. And in year one, you don't have any new people because the new people only join in the future. So the black line is equal to the red line because the future new entrants haven't come in year one because they're only people who come in the future. So when your starting point, on day one, you only have current members and you have the contributions from current members. And by definition, you don't have any contributions from future joiners because they haven't joined yet. So their contribution is 0 on day one. So the red line is not above the black line. It's only as they join the scheme in the future that they provide additional contributions, which is why the red line is above the black. But on day one, they haven't joined yet, so there's no money from them.
I do understand that. It's just we have to have a current point.
Yes.
And so is this explaining the current point, or is this just a notional way of describing what's going to happen over the next 25 years?
This is saying that at the moment, if you look at year one, at the moment, the contributions coming in are a bit less than the benefits going out, and a bit of income is therefore used. It's slightly cash negative at the moment in terms of having to use some income. But what this is saying is, how might it evolve in the future? Is it going to become an issue for the fund in terms of becoming cash negative? And what we're saying is that if this 100% replacement carries on and you can access £20 million of investment income, then on that basis it would be another 10 to 20 years before you were being forced to sell assets every month. But there is a real sensitivity there. So if fewer people come into the scheme, then you could move cash negative more quickly. So it's looking at how it might evolve in the future. Are you going to become deeply cash negative, or are you largely going to be able to run the benefits by taking some income? It is a projection forward, but it's the starting point is today that you are a bit cash negative, and that is.
Yeah, Councillor Nicholl.
Thanks, Chair. I think this is optimistic, to say the least, because we're looking at possibly a 20% reduction in the workforce. And if we're getting a 20% reduction in the workforce, we're going to get a 20% reduction in the contributions from that workforce, or really, logically, that would be the outcome. And, with all due respect, I hope I'm here in 25 years, but I would question there's any chance of that happening. I think Davy McKee and I might not be here. But I just feel that that gap is, I doubt, is going to get an awful lot bigger.
It could, yes, and if there's a big reduction in workforce, what this is saying, and this is not the main strategy analysis. What this is saying is, if that happens, that requirement from income is going to be quite a bit bigger. And when we come to the later stages, we'll be talking about assets that just just produce a higher level of income, rather less in terms of capital gain, and suggesting that the fund maybe wants to be looking at those asset classes anyway. If you get a huge reduction and a big fall in contributions, we may need to do that even more so. Yeah, because it is very sensitive to changes like that. Okay. So I've said, when you have a deficit, you're taking a certain amount of investment risk, you're making contributions. The idea is to get up to that fully funded position and ideally maintain it. But then on slide 10, when you get the scheme to being 100% funded, you need to decide from that point on what your priorities are. Are you then going to take a bit less investment risk because you're not trying to make up a deficit, or do you want to keep taking investment risk because every pound you earn goes towards effectively reducing the cost of ongoing contributions? When you're fully funded, you are just paying the cost of accruing benefits, and there is an ongoing cost of having people in the scheme. But you may still choose to have investment risk on the table because everything you earn from that can effectively subsidise the cost of ongoing benefits. So, but when funds get to that position of being 100% funded, and you won't be an awful long way away from that at the moment, I suspect. There is a conscious decision to be made as to whether you take the same amount of risk or whether you take a bit of risk off the table. Right, Jamie's just going to cover now a kind of summary of what asset liability modelling is, just as a reminder. I think most of you have probably seen some before.
That's great. Thanks very much, Paul, for introducing the first section of our report. Looking at slide 12, what we're trying to do is summarise the inputs and assumptions that we've used in generating our asset liability modelling. As a starting point, we've taken the March 2017 valuation and we've rolled that forward to March 2018 to reflect expected changes in the fund's membership. From then, we've projected forward to reflect the current market environment and capture our expected returns across all the asset classes. The analysis we've done has been based at a whole fund level and incorporates all employers that are currently paying into the fund at present. Our assumptions have not only the expected returns from each asset class, but also from a wide range of different returns which might be earned over the period, as well as to an extent how those returns are correlated with each other under certain circumstances. We also model a wide range of potential levels of inflation in the future, including some quite extreme scenarios as well, which obviously we hope we don't ever run into, but we model them nonetheless in order to capture and show what an extreme event could, how that could impact on the fund. Moving on to slide 13. What we're showing here is a summary of how our liability modelling works in the background. What we do is we input our assets and liability. We input our assets at day 0, which is March 2018, and we're then projecting them forward using 5,000 different scenarios. The scenarios we use, again, cover those extreme inflation and interest movements, and also market movements that our modelling team have arranged as well. What we're then looking to capture is all of the outputs from those 5,000 models, and we're looking to capture what the probability of success is for each of those, as in the success being defined as is the pension fund going to be fully funded or not, and also we're looking to really target the bottom 5% of that as well, to say in extreme scenarios what is the worst outcome that the fund could expect to be at the 20-year point. That summarises slide 14 as well, and this is breaking down our best outcomes and the median line for that, and also the worst scenarios as well. If we just to touch on the pink diamond shown on slide 14, this is what we will be defining as the probability of success, and that is our fully funded level. The bar graph that we'll be showing is the average of the worst 5 outcomes. So what we're essentially looking to do is we want the pink diamond as high as possible, so we've got that really good chance of success. And we also want the blue bar as high as possible as well, to show that even in a relatively speaking poor outcome, we've still got a very good chance of meeting that target of success that we've defined as fully funded. Moving on to slide 15. What we've shown here is the various models that we've ran through our systems. The first one, we've input the current investment strategy. I won't go through the figures in too much detail for that, but we've shown that to say if we make no changes to the current investment strategy, this is the outcome that we project in 20 years' time. And we've also provided a higher risk strategy. So for this, we've moved 10% out of our low risk bonds and we've put that into equities. We deem this as higher risk because equities are more volatile, but we also expect them to generate higher returns. On the lower risk strategies, we've shown we've shown 4. We've shown 2 diversifying options and 2 bond options. The diversifying options, we're looking to reduce out of equities and into infrastructure. And on the bond de-risking, we're looking to reduce out of equities and put into low-risk bonds. For low risk one and for lower risk one diversifying and bonds, it's a 10% drop in equities and into the other areas of the investment strategy. For lower risk 2, we're looking to take 20% out of equities and put that into other asset classes. They're deemed lower risk because, as touched on before, we're looking to swap out of equities which are, relatively speaking, quite high risk and put them into more secure assets which have got a much lower return risk.
Sorry, just one point on that. Don't get hung up on the specific allocations to each asset class. What we're trying to do here is not make a specific recommendation as to exactly what you should do in each of these scenarios. What we're trying to do is capture the impact at the high level of diversifying from equities or moving into bonds. The actual detail of what we might allocate to individual asset classes, what we'll work on and bring back in stage 2. But what we're trying to do is get the characteristics of a portfolio that diversifies from equities or de-risks from equities. And we've increased these allocations to things like diversified growth and property and infrastructure because that captures the characteristics of what new portfolios should look like. But don't hang upon these as being, specific recommendations. It gives you an idea of the flavour of what these portfolios are.
Stephen?
Yeah, it was just on that because obviously you've got some top level strategies modelled there, and I suppose I was maybe looking for, we had a move some time ago to move to the diversified growth fund. Billy Gifford provides an aspect to that for us in terms of how the model by which they invest. But I was almost maybe expecting to see models where that type of diversified growth fund product might have been varied a bit, so you could see, well, what would be the impact of if you took that as an aspect of how we move towards different strategies over the next few decades. Because I know we did look at absolute return in terms of an income option as well, as opposed to just the diversified growth. So, which I presume would come in under income assets. But I'm just wondering, we don't seem to have shown any models where in this here, but obviously if you've done 5,000, I'm sure that would have cropped up somewhere along the way. Just to be sure as well, on slide 14, the average, when you're talking about the averages and the medians and whatnot, I'm assuming that the average of the worst 5% or 250 scenarios is a mean. And because you've used the median, it's just a sort of a rhyme that my daughter told me when she came home from school about modes, means, and medians. But is there a cluster? Like, so I'm conscious they use the median as a kind of best outcome. Is there a kind of grouping or cluster within your sort of scenarios that sort of says, well, actually, most scenarios would incline towards this area here, but I'd imagine the further away you get from that, there'd be more variation and extremes, if you like. So you'd have to take I'm just sort of wondering what method of average you've taken. You know.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about a median outcome there because we are just literally taking the 2,500 in the middle. If you look at the distribution, it's kind of, sort of normal shape distribution, not exactly. You get quite big, you get bigger tails, if you like, bigger ends. The extreme scenarios tend to be perhaps a bit bigger than they would be in a theoretical curve. So when we're talking about the average of the 5%, it is the average of those that fall in the bottom 5%. So if you get a bad outcome, and we're defining a bad outcome as being those 5% worst outcomes, what might that be? And so we're taking an average of those that lie at the bottom. So it's the idea with this is to get a risk measure and a return measure. So your probability of success is what's the chances that we're fully funded at the end of this period. We want that to be as high as possible. But what's our downside risk measure? It's the blue bar. If we get a bad outcome, how bad is that? Because then when we look at different strategies, we can say, well, this gives us more downside protection, because if we get one of these bad outcomes, we only fall to 60% rather than 50%. I mean, you're carrying a lot. This is not the results for the fund. This is a picture still. We'll look at the results of the fund in a minute. But some of the funding levels in the bad outcomes are pretty bad. I mean, there's lots of investment risk here, and there are some quite bad outcomes. So, the level of downside risk from each strategy you need to bear in mind, as well as just going for the highest return.
For thoroughness, but the 1,450 scenarios that aren't accounted for, I take it they're below the diamond and above the 5%, and they're just kind of, that's not where we want to be. So obviously there's some scenarios that we're not really looking at. We're sort of discounting from this sort of picture.
Well, they're all of the scenarios are kind of reflected in where that pink diamond will come, because the pink diamond is saying, if you read off the left-hand chart, it's saying that under this strategy here, 66% of all the outcomes from the model meet that requirement of getting you fully funded at the end. So it's looking at all of the outcomes and saying, how many achieve the objective? What's the chances that we achieve the objective under that investment strategy and with those contributions? And the answer there is, or 2/3 of them, 66% of them, meet that requirement to be fully funded at the end of the period. So that's reading off the left-hand side and is a probability of achieving the objective. The blue bar will read off the right-hand side and say, if things go badly, what funding level might we be looking at? And we've looked at the valuation after next, so 2023 as a measure, where might we be if things go really badly between now and then? So, I mean, we'll look at the individual charts of the fund, but all the outcomes are being captured, and we're literally counting how many of the 5,000 meet the objective of leaving you fully funded.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just to turn to page 16. In terms of contributions, we've modelled the current employer contribution rate of 21.5%. And we've also modelled 3 other lower levels of contribution as well. We're not saying that you can choose to pay these today as much as we might like to. But what we're looking to do is we want to avoid reducing the level of investment risk and making it impossible for you to reduce contributions, pay those reduced contributions in the future. By fixing each contribution scenario, it allows us to compare the underlying differences in backgrounds and stabilisation mechanisms in place. Sorry, and looking forward, it lets us see what things may look like in the future if we do obtain those higher success models which Paul just mentioned, that when the valuation is reviewed in 2023, provided a good outcome, then the option might be on the table then to reduce the contribution rate by the employer.
What we need to avoid is taking some investment risk off the table now and then finding that you can't reduce.
Paul, could you put your mic on, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
We don't want to take some investment risk out now and then find in the next valuation you can't reduce the contribution rate from 21.5%. So we have to think about what levels of contributions in the future are consistent with what kind of investment strategy. And that's why we've looked at lower target contributions, just as it gives us an idea of how much risk we might be prepared to take. If we move on to look at the results from the fund, I mean, I'd start with slide 18. And if we take your current investment strategy and the way you currently set contributions, which is to allow them to move up or down within a kind of stabilized band in the future, we can see on the right-hand side of the chart there, the chances that the current investment strategy and the current contribution strategy leave you fully funded at the end of the period, something like 76, 77%. And if things go badly, by the valuation after next, that funding level could be down actually just below 50% because of the sheer amount of investment risk that runs in the strategy. Now, one of the things we do is we actually fix the level of contributions, because otherwise, when we're looking at the impact of different investment strategies, if in the background the contribution rate is drifting up and down as well, we might be taking risk out, and the model might be assuming, therefore, that the contribution rate ticks up, which we don't want to happen. So we actually fix that going forward, and we say, well, if you're happy paying that contribution rate, what's the situation for this strategy? And then we look at alternative contributions as well. It might be easier to, I've included some of the summary comments in these slides. So, on slide 19 there, under the current arrangements, you've got a good chance of meeting this long-term objective given your current strategy and your current contributions. But as I say, the high level of risk means that the downside is inevitably quite big. Yes.
Obviously, you're given success measures, probability of full funding in 2037, so 20 years. So, and I'm just sort of, is one of the assumptions, are we kind of, in the different modelled scenarios that you've got, I suppose one way to do it would be you kind of lock in the current thing and let it run, let the ball fall down the thing and see which hole it falls into or whatever, and then sort of program in, right, well, we assume that bonds will revert to normal levels over a period of time. We assume that, various broad assumptions. But does it also allow that, well, actually, in 3 years' time, the pension subcommittee might be going, do you know what, this course of action needs tweaking because we can see this is going to end up in 2037 looking pretty grim. So we'll have to review our strategy because we've got good reason to, because materially, right. So what I mean is, are we locked in this 5,000 scenarios, because I was intrigued by this, are these locked in? So it's like we're assuming that the pension subcommittee just basically sits back and watches for 20 years.
It's assuming that the strategy is maintained for that period. It's saying if we keep with this strategy, these are the potential outcomes.
So I think the point I'm trying to get at is, if we chose a strategy and then we found out after review, well, actually, this strategy, although it seemed right at the time, we can now see that we've got a greater likelihood in 3 years' time, for example, from now, that we're going to actually be in this worst 5% scenario. So we better adjust our strategy, because now that's more likely. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So I'm just sort of wondering what scope for there's clearly protections within the fact that we will change our strategy in the next 20 years, and I think there's a high probability of that.
Well, the way this would often work is after each actuarial valuation, you would effectively rerun the same type of modelling. So you've looked to the long term, you've said, if we maintain this strategy, what are the implications, and therefore are we happy with this strategy or another one? But actually then 3 years down the route, you say, well, where are we now? Let's rerun this again. And actually, if things have changed hugely, on the basis of the new analysis 3 years later, we might want to change the strategy on the back of that. So although it's an exercise that you'll go through after each valuation, and if something dramatic has happened, you'd run this analysis again, and they'd be saying, well, goodness, if you keep this investment strategy, you're in trouble because markets have fallen 30%, and now the scenarios look really bad. So, you would effectively look at this output again, taken 3 years forward.
The point I'm trying to make is that I think there's a difference. There's an illustration here, which is slightly hyperbolic, because you would never get. I mean, I can't see a situation where this pension subcommittee would ever get in a situation where we're saying, actually, we are heading towards the worst 5%. It just wouldn't happen.
No, you would never go.
In effect, there's a 0% chance of that actually ever being an outcome, because if we ever got to a point where that was going to happen, we would change the strategy.
You would, and you'd be told to put more contributions in as well. So the actuary would not let you end up in that really bad position. But it gives you an idea of the risk. But admittedly, you'd never be allowed to get there because the actuary would be hiking your contribution rate up. That's the problem, yes. It is, yes, if it was hands off and left to its own devices, that's an indication of the downside risk, but you wouldn't be allowed, something would happen to stop you getting there. But that might be a bigger bill in terms of contributions.
Yeah, Paul, could I just ask a question that you're basing this on the contribution levels of the employer 21.5% and the employee at 5.8%. This actually might be a question for Andy, I'm not sure. Does everybody, all the employees, do they actually contribute 5.8%, or are they
I think it's
employees?
meant to be a kind of average across the membership.
Is it an average? Right.
I mean, it comes from the actuarial team, but it's meant to be an average of what members are paying, but individual members pay different rates.
Yeah. Councillor Nicholl?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. How often do we revalue? You said after each revaluation. How often is that? Is that an annual thing, or is it every 5 years or 6 years?
The actuarial valuation is every 3 years.
Every 3
so
years.
That's when all the liability data is updated. You go through the discussions on contributions, and as Paul said, that's often when you would look as well at the investment strategy as part of that review of the sort of high-level fund.
Yeah, I mean, if it's any longer than that, things can go pear-shaped quite quickly in this financial world.
Yeah, and if things moved hugely, there have been occasions where we've had to kind of renew this analysis between valuations, because there's been like in the financial crisis, people have said, we've done this analysis, we've set the strategy, but the world's been turned on its head. Can we rerun it and see if we're okay staying as we are or not? So there can be instances where we would do some kind of interim review using this.
David?
Thank you. Paul, 2 questions. First one is, when you last did this for us, was the probability higher or lower than it is now of success?
I've not been through this exercise before. I don't know when the last asset liability modelling was done here. There was some done in relation to the valuation, but that was focused on setting contributions, and some of that was presented last year. Mm-hmm. I remember the probabilities were very similar, because what's happened to funds is, although the asset values have gone up, yields have fallen slightly. So funding levels are a bit better today than they were a year ago, without putting a specific number on that. So they won't have changed very much. I've not been through this exercise here, but some time before.
I think after the 2014 valuation, the 2011 valuation, we went through this exercise and we made some fairly substantial changes to the strategy. After the 2014 valuation, we had Kymans carried out an informal review and decided that there wasn't such a need to review the structure. But again, following from the 17 valuation, And we're looking at it, and it's like, I think after the 2011 one, that was when we moved a lot. We reduced the allocation to bonds, increased the allocation to to equities, and increased the allocation to property. That was left the same at 2014. This is now looking at the thing again to try and work out where we need going forward. I think when you're asking about the probability of success, I mean, it's always that kind of probability you're looking at when you determine the strategy, is it not?
Yeah, you'd want that probability.
Paul, could you put your mic on, please? Thank you.
You'd want that probability of success to be above a certain level, to be happy as a committee that your balance of contributions and investment is expected to deliver what you need it to deliver, which is to get to 100% funding. So, if we did this analysis and the probability was 50%, you should be really worried, because that's, a 50-50 chance of getting fully funded isn't really very good. Now, there's no magical limit that says what you should be looking for. I mean, people think about a kind of 2/3 chance reflecting a suitable degree of prudence, but you would want a better than 50-50 chance of what you have in terms of contributions, investments, getting the scheme fully funded and keep it. Now, some funds look at this and their probabilities are, in the 50s, and things are pretty hard. And other funds look at this and everything's in the 80s, and they're, and they're taking risk off. So they do vary, but you need it to be above 50% really, and somewhere around 2/3, 70% might be the limit between where you're comfortable or not comfortable.
Okay, thank you. That was really what I was wondering, is how it had changed in terms of the last time I had a strategy change. Have we increased the probability because of that strategy change? And the second question was a comparison one with other, sort of, I suppose, local government pension funds. Are we looking at being in the right ballpark in terms of probability compared to other pension funds, or are we looking at being slightly out or whatever, better or worse than them?
It often comes down to this kind of level, because if funds are looking at this analysis and the chances that their contributions, their investments, deliver full funding are sort of 80% plus, they're saying, right, well, actually, we want to do something about this. We either want to pay less in contributions, or we want to take some investment risk out, because we'd be happy with a 2/3 chance or a 70% chance. So if these probabilities are really high, it prompts a discussion over, well, how do we get some benefit from that? How do we de-risk the strategy, or do we pay less in contributions, or do we do a bit of both? So it would normally prompt some action which would reduce that, because they would regard that almost as being, giving themselves too much comfort. If you see, they'd be saying, can we not pay less in contributions? So they would then be looking to maybe take some risk out or take some contribution rates down, which would bring them down to maybe a 70% level. Does that make sense?
No, I do appreciate the technicalities of why we do it and etc. It's really more of an actual real life comparison. Are other pension funds in the local government sector in about 70% as well, or are they generally better or worse than that in Scotland?
They are generally around in the low 70s now, really, because funding positions have improved, which has tended to move these up, and only those funds that are now in surplus are looking at probabilities of over 80%, but they're then doing something about it, which is then moving them back down. So this is not untypical. Now, a lot are now finding themselves in the 70s.
Stephen?
Thanks again, Chair. So there was a couple of things. One was about at the moment we've got a sort of 100% chance of being 92% funded, because we are right now, right? So, but in terms of, and that's an improvement from where we were, where we were 90% funded back in 2012, 14. I think it talks about it in the report. But is the 100%, obviously that's the holy grail, as it were. But if you were to show me the same chart or modelling, saying there's run 5,000 scenarios, and actually there's a 80% chance we'd be 99% funded, or do you know what I mean? So there would be scenarios where we could actually reach, say, 97% funded, and it'd be a bang, you know, dead cert almost, or it'd be 95% if we didn't do anything, or if we just changed this. So what I mean is there's degrees of closeness. So the closer you get to that 100%, it's going to be a lower probability of having a higher chance of success. You see what I mean? So because you're aiming for perfection, if you like. So is there a sort of a tolerance level whereby you'd say, well, actually, if you changed rather small amount of things or adjusted your strategy in this way, you'd probably be pretty guaranteed to get to sort of 95, 96% funding, which is an improvement to where we are now. And if somebody said that to me in 20 years' time, hey, you're 96% funded, I'd be thinking that's not bad if it was here, you know. But you know, so I'm just wondering how broad is a brushstroke? Because we're really looking at a broad brushstroke thing here, aren't we?
You can't lock in where you are now, unfortunately, because when you say you're 92% funded in the valuation, the actuary assumes that the assets will return, 1.8% over gilts, so they'll earn a certain return, and so you need to keep quite a lot of investment risk on the table to give yourself a good chance of earning that. So you can't take lots of risk out and say, can we move incrementally from 92 to 93 to 94, 95? Because even though you start at 92, you're having to justify the valuation basis, you're having to carry quite a lot of investment risk. Quite a lot of investment risk means quite a wide funnel of outcomes. So even though you start at 92, there's a chance you end up at the next valuation at 82. Because you can't lock in that 92. And even when you get to 100, when you're 100% funded and the actuary says, and we're assuming you'll earn gilts plus 1.8, you have to have a strategy that's earning, maybe a bit more than that, gilts plus 2, to justify the basis. But to have a strategy expected to earn that implies taking quite a lot of risk. So even from 100, there's still a reasonable chance you go back to 90 or 85 again. So you can't lock in the position because of the assumptions in the valuation. You can narrow that funnel of outcomes, but it'll still be quite wide because built into the valuation basis is this assumed long-term return. And you would only lock in a position by going really heavily into bonds. And if you do that, the actuary would revisit the contributions. And, I don't think the long-term way of funding this scheme isn't really to be invested largely in bonds, because that will cost you a fortune in terms of contributions. So you need to run some investment risk for the long term to make the scheme affordable. But that means there'll always be this range of outcomes from where you are.
For me anyway, because that's well answered, I think. In terms of the 5,000 scenarios, I mean, when I read this, I thought, this is quite an interesting illustration. There's a lot of scope for thought around this, but is that, and forgive me for asking, but is that just that's the standard tool that's used to predict these scenarios for actuarial valuations or whatever? Is that so other pension funds use the same 5,000 scenario models, or is that something unique to Hymans Robertson? It's just to know that, just to get the assurance that this is actually the right tool to provide the basis for the information on which we're about to make a decision.
Paul, microphone, please.
That's the number of scenarios that is run in all the modelling we do across all our actuarial clients and investment clients and behind the valuation. And this type of approach is used by other advisors as well. And our quant team will have done the work and said that running this 5,000 times is sufficient to capture the range of outcomes so that we can talk meaningfully in terms of probabilities. I don't know off the top of my head whether someone else would run 10,000 or 7,000 or 2,000. I don't actually know. But it's not actually an effort to run lots more. So the quant team will have said, how many times do we need to run this such that the output is robust in terms of looking at probabilities? And whenever we run this model for any type of client, it uses these 5,000 scenarios. So it's consistent with what you do on the valuation. Somebody may run a different number from a different firm.
just when I was beginning to get a handle on pensions, and along comes Councillor Thompson with his technical questions. You've totally confused me now. Please carry on, Paul.
Sorry, if we can just look at slide 20. What we've done here is we've run the analysis for each of the individual investment strategies. For each one, we've plotted what's the chances of success of getting to at least fully funding, and they're the pink bars running along the top. And if we get a bad outcome, where does that leave the funding level? And that's the blue bar. And what I'd pull out of this is if, for example, you move across from the current strategy to what we've called low risk one diversifying. So this is moving money out of equities into other types of return seeking assets, but not into low risk bonds. The probability of being fully funded at the end of the period is broadly the same, right? It's kind of 1% higher. But what you get in terms of the blue bar is you get more protection on the downside. Because you're better diversified, the number of scenarios that leave you really, really poorly funded, you're buying more protection in terms of downside risk. If you move that 10% from equities just into bonds, say you just go and buy gilts or investment grade corporate bonds in that next one, that probability of success does dip down because you're investing in things then that are expected to, produce much lower returns. And you don't actually benefit much in terms of risk. And as you go to the right, as you take more risk out of the strategy, that probability of success falls away to the right. But the caveat, if you can keep that page open with the one below, the conclusions from that are, this modest diversification from equities maintains that probability of success, but it gives you better protection on the downside. But if you move it into low risk bonds, you're eating away at that probability of being fully funded. But the important thing here is the point at the bottom, which is this is taking that 21.5% contribution rate and assuming that you're happy to just keep paying that forever. Because there are some funds that are paying contribution rates in the low, sort of mid to high teens who have said, this is the cost of the benefits, this is locked into our budgets, we're happy paying this, and we want to take some investment risk out. But we would assume, most funds are looking to get the contribution rates down from current levels. So if you are happy to keep paying 21.5% forever, that's what happens to the probabilities. But the reason that we've run lower contribution rates is if you have an ambition to reduce the contribution rate from the current level, does that prevent us taking some of the investment risk out? So we've then run it again on slide 22 with a kind of long-term contribution rate of 19.5%. So this is allowing for the fact that you would like to go into future valuations talking about lower contributions. And if we look at the analysis on 22, what we can see is that low-risk diversifying strategy still keeps your probability of success quite high, still improves your downside risk, but the impact of any of the strategies to the right is to have quite a material impact on that getting to full funding. Because this is assuming you're having less cash coming into the scheme. So under that scenario, there is scope to move some money from equities into other assets, but not to do anything more drastic. And you're constrained further if you go into slide 24, which is to say, if you're really trying to get the contribution rate down and stable at 17.5%, then some of these strategies on the right-hand side, the probabilities are really going to dip quite low because you're paying less money in and you're taking some risk out. And that's leaving you pretty close to that uncomfortable level of being, 50 to 60%. But the low risk diversifying strategy, the probability still holds up quite well. And if we run all of the different contribution strategies and all of the different investment strategies and generate all these bars and all these pink diamonds, we can summarise all those numbers on one chart. And that's what we've done on slide 26. It's effectively to run every different combination of contribution strategy and investment strategy. And on slide 26, the table at the top is saying, where is that pink diamond for every combination? What's the chances of being fully funded at the end of that period? And we would like that to be as high as possible, really. And where are all the blue bars from that analysis? They're shown on the bottom table. And I've coloured them red and green, not to say you must do this and you mustn't do that, but just to show you how the colours change across the chart. Now, all you need to draw from this is in the top chart, your best chance of success, not surprisingly, is in the top left-hand corner. You're paying the most money in, and you've got the most risk in the investment strategy. So your best chance of success will drive you towards the top left-hand corner. On the bottom chart, when you're looking at risk, this will be saying, well, your risk profile is better in the bottom left-hand corner because you've got the lowest risk investment strategy and you're paying the most cash in. So that will have the best outcomes in the left-hand corner. Your ambition, though, might be to pay lower contributions. So you would like to move to the right-hand side, really. You would rather pay less rather than more. And this is the type of analysis that we'd look at to say, against this background, which of these combinations seem palatable and which don't. Yes.
Put your mic on, please, Joe.
Well, you could come to the monitor and do this for me. Given that the calculation of pensions now is the average earnings over your employment period, I think, what difference has that made to the money that's going to go out from the pension fund?
It affects the benefit payments that will go out because they're calculated in a different way. Having said that, all the service that was accrued up to the date of the change is obviously paid out under the old rules. So everything you earn, everything that was earned under final salary will be paid in the future on that basis. But it does, when the cash flows that we get from the actuaries that we used in the valuation reflect the fact that benefits earned going forward will be of a different type, and they're calculated in a different way. So it's built into the kind of estimates going forward, the fact that there's a different calculation for future benefits. So it's in the liability data in the model.
So as things are, you could say, right, I've got, is it 2014 it was changed? I've got so much to pay out in pensions, and the rest you're estimating as you go along.
Yeah, they'll say for each member, well, they've got 20 years service up to the change on this basis, and they will accrue going forward under the new basis. And so the benefits payable to this individual member are a blend of the two, and they will be X in each year. So that's the minutiae of the calculation that the actuaries doing when they're looking at the benefits payable for each member. It incorporates the fact that they'll have a certain type of service, and then they'll have some more going forward. And that's in their projections. That's kind of calculated. Before we try and draw some conclusions, there is a final section. Everything we've looked at.
Elaine, you'd like to ask a question?
It was just a point because you said that the higher risk with the highest contribution rate had the greatest chance of success, but in fact the low risk diversifying seems to have an equally good chance of success.
Yes, it does. It comes out as being the same. Yes, I mean the trend will be the best numbers will be in the top left, but yes, it's not absolutely true of every cell, and yes, and you're right, and that.
And I think that's quite an interesting because that's the one with the investment in infrastructure and property. So that's quite an interesting.
Yes, and so
scenario, isn't it?
we're going into other return-seeking assets, which actually have as good a chance of getting to where you want to be as equities, but you get the risk protection because you're getting diversification. Before we try and draw some conclusions, everything we've looked at the moment is taking your current starting point. So you're 92% in the valuation, what's happened since then, and then projecting forward. And so we can draw some conclusions as to what kind of strategy you might want to set now. But the other thing we look at in the modelling, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this today, is on these last 2 or 3 slides, 27, 28 and 29, because obviously between valuations, the funding level moves around. And running this analysis when you're 90% funded may give you one answer. But if you were 100% funded, the analysis might be saying something slightly different. And if you're 110% funded, it might be saying something again. So we also run the analysis to say, if the funding level were 10% higher, so if we get a rally in markets or an increase in yield such that the funding level goes up quite a bit, would the analysis be telling us something different? And what it shows, not surprisingly, is that you've got a bit more scope to reduce contributions and take some investment risk off the table as well, because your probabilities all move up if you're doing it from 100 rather than 90, and so you've got a few more options. We're not there today, but it's sometimes worth noting that if we go through a period when the funding level is rising quite sharply, we can remind ourselves that the analysis would be saying that actually we perhaps have a bit more scope for changing the strategy. So it might be best to go to the conclusions, which I'll just go through on slide 31. We ran the analysis assuming initially that you were happy to pay 21.5% forever. That gave you a certain amount of scope to move money into bonds and lower risk assets. But we're assuming that there is an ambition to reduce contribution rates from current levels. And therefore, on that basis, we wouldn't be advocating a switch into what we call low-risk bonds, gilts and corporate bonds. But this low-risk diversifying one strategy, where we switch money from equities into some of these alternative return-seeking assets, does appear to improve the risk-return property. It keeps your chances of success high, and it actually improves your downside protection. And the third point is quite important. We talked about income right at the start. You're needing some income now, and there are assets which deliver their returns largely in the form of income, and they tend to be more stable assets, and they will also help to provide the fund with a higher level of income going forward. An improvement in the funding level of the region of 100%, so 100% also rather than 90, 92, that opens up the option of potentially moving money into diversifying assets and doing a switch from equities into low-risk bonds as well, and targeting a lower contribution rate too. We're not there today, but if over the next 12 months, the funding level is rising, and that's something we can kind of access through the actuarial colleagues, it means we can return to this and say, well, do we want to be locking some of that in by actually moving some into low-risk bonds? So we're not advocating that today, but the analysis is saying if the funding level was 10% higher, you could also do that kind of de-risking as well as aiming for lower contributions. Now, that's quite a complicated session, but the gist of this, and this comes back to Paul's start, was the recommendation is that we will bring to the next meeting a detailed review of all the different components of the fund. But in order to do that, we need to have an idea of how big those components are going to be. Are we going to keep sort of equities, other assets and bonds largely as they are, or do we want to change the amount to each component? So the aim today is to agree on what the characteristics of that portfolio should look like in terms of high-level strategy. And if that's agreed, then to come along to the next meeting by saying, right, now we know that we need approximately X% in equities, Y% in other assets, and Z% in low-risk bonds. Here's the detail of how we think the fund should get those. And the recommendation is that what we've called this lower risk one diversifying strategy, which we first mentioned on slide 15, something with those characteristics is what we'd recommend as a change to the fund. So 10% or so less in equity to the extent that we can find assets such as infrastructure or private debt or types of high yielding credit, or use of, I mean, just harking back to the diversified growth fund, there are diversified income funds around that that kind of fit into that category as well, which I think are quite interesting. But something with the characteristics of lower risk diversifying one, we think is where the fund should be looking to go now. If the funding level goes a lot higher, we can then have a discussion over whether we want to pull some money into low risk bonds, but we're not advocating that.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Has any members got any more questions or comments you would like to make? Councillor Thompson.
No, I mean, yeah, I think that's fair. I think when I was looking at 4.5 in the report on page 2, I was sort of hoping that the lower risk 1 and 2, because one offer, one's sort of more protected, even though the sort of growth isn't the same, for example, just in that summary chart. And just from reading through the matrices being supplied here, obviously you've got to balance against the worst case scenario and protection against that, and also the in terms of what we can realise from it. But I would have, rather than plump for just low risk 1 diversification, it'd been interesting to see if you're going to take this away and come back with something. And I don't know what other members think, but I'd have wanted to maybe see both sort of options on both scenarios. So in terms of what you seem to be saying is it's low risk 1 diversifying as opposed to looking at low risk 2 diversifying as well.
Yeah, low risk 2 diversifying.
Paul, put your mic.
We're taking essentially 20% from equities. We're putting 10% into low-risk bonds, to government and corporate bonds, and we're putting 10% into other return-seeking assets. And we're suggesting from the analysis that 10% into low-risk bonds does have an impact on that probability of success at the moment, which is so some of the results of the analysis suggest that at the moment that is taking quite a lot of risk off the table to take 20% out of equities.
I think when I was reading it though, I was kind of looking at it thinking, right, what is an acceptable range of tolerance, if you like? So I was looking at the matrices thinking, well, the difference between, say, contribution rates 21.5 and 15.5, which is the extreme at the lower end. There's for example, the high risk strategy, there's only like a 7% difference really from the high end to the low end in terms of the range of contributions that you could, do you know what I mean? So I was trying to make a kind of, well, if you're saying that there's a 68% chance of fully funded if you take low risk 2 diversifying, I was thinking, well, that's still more than 2/3, but the actual protection is still sort of at worst 50-50, whereas the low risk 1 diversifying is less than 50-50. So I was trying to balance that and saying, well, there's an acceptable range there that you could say, well, it's still sufficient success or sufficient. But that was just my view when I read the report. So
yeah, the 68% is if you're happy to keep paying 21.5% contributions. So if you're on slide 26 on the top table, the low risk 2 diversifying does have a 68% chance of success, but only under an ongoing contribution rate of 21.5%. If you have an ambition to pay 19.5 or 17.5, that slips away. So the idea is if we want to keep open the option of getting contribution rates down, then under that scenario, those fall away, as you can see, down to 65 and 61, whereas under the others, under the low risk one diversifying, that 72, falls away to 69, 66, and is still 2/3. Now, we don't want to over sort of scientifically analyze one difference in percentage here, but the problem with the low risk two diversifiers is, if you want to reduce contributions as well, those chances of success do fall away quite meaningfully.
Councillor McKee.
I'm getting back onto this level of payment. Is there a reduction in the actual payment that will be paid out of the pension that would be paid out on this new way of calculating your final pension? Because obviously if the payment out is going to be less, you're going to reach your 100% a lot easier than you would be if it was staying in the best year of the last 3.
Sorry, in terms of paying out the value of individual pensions?
Yeah, it's the value of the pension based on the average as against the best year of your last 3.
But that's factored into what the scheme has to pay. So the liabilities of the fund, as they're calculated by the actuary and predicted by the actuary, take into account the fact that the benefits are calculated on a different basis under the care scheme than they were under final salary. So when they predict all the payments that the scheme needs to pay out, that takes into account the fact that it's a different basis in the future. And so all we're looking at is, given they're the benefit payments that need to go out, how do we make sure we have enough cash to pay those? So the 100% funding means meeting all of those benefits calculated on the different bases that have existed over the years under the different schemes. So that's
the end result hasn't changed from your point of view.
No, that's factored into what the liabilities of the fund are.
Okay, if there's no more questions or comments, we'll go to recommendation. Sorry, have we got somebody else? All right. Sorry, Claire. We'll go to recommendations. The recommendation 2.1 is to note the contents of the presentation review of investment strategy by Hymans Robertson. 2.2 is to agree the change in investment strategy from the current allocation to a modest switch from equity investments to alternative return-seeking assets to improve the risk/return profile of the fund, as detailed in 4.7 below, and 2.3 agree to receive a report on the detailed asset allocation at the September 2018 meeting of the subcommittee. Do we agree? David?
Ask for a bit of clarification. 4.8 is saying it's closely aligning to low risk 1. Is that what we're agreeing here today, or are we just agreeing to make a change as such?
Paul?
That's effectively what we're asking members to agree. To agree, as Paul said earlier on, it wouldn't be specifically exactly in line with the scenario that's outlined for low risk 1 diversifying, but it would be most closely aligned with that. That's what we're asking members to agree today.
And it's really a steer for us to bring back that next paper. So nothing gets implemented on the back of this decision. What happens is that when we bring back the detailed recommendations, they are based on a portfolio that looks broadly like that with those characteristics.
Yeah, David?
Okay, in that case, could I ask members to look at page 26, again, slide 26. And specifically the funding levels in the worst 5% of outcomes, because there's considerably less risk in the option low risk 2 diversifying than there is in low risk 1. You know, if we're just looking at strategies, the risk of failure is considerably less with low risk 2 than it is with low risk 1.
Paul?
You get more downside protection with low risk 2, but I guess we're trying to balance that with the ability to get contribution rates lower as well, and to keep the chances of success quite high. They're the three things we're trying to balance. If we want some downside risk protection, we'd like to have the option of getting contribution rates down, and we want the probability of success to remain reasonably high. And they're the three things we're trying to balance.
Yeah, thank you. If you look at slides 28 and 29, though, the chances of probability of success on low risk 2 is pretty similar. There's not a lot of difference.
Yeah, and interestingly, that's with a 10% higher funding level. So in fact, yes, if we were sitting here today saying it's 102, or 10% more than when we did the modelling, there would be far more case for doing a switch into bonds for exactly that reason, because the probability. But as of today, they aren't broadly the same.
Stephen?
Yeah, thanks. I suppose what I'm really checking is within the report it's saying, here's your 5 choices, pick one of them. And I think what I was really trying to get to was, are we able to look, because I'm not totally, I take the description as we've had so far, but I think between lower risk 1 and 2, diversifying, I think clearly that's the best place to go. It's just that I'm not sure in between those two sort of options, are they completely discrete, so there's no way that we could get something back in terms of the detailed report that's going to come back that could say, well, actually, on the one end, given that we've sort of gone for the diversifying, is there sort of a range within that would say, well, yes, you'll get better protection if you do this, but now that we've looked at it in more detail, there's maybe, because obviously these are very broad brushstrokes to now, this is just setting a direction of travel, but I suppose we'll have to pick one of the 5, or can we say, well, can we get a bit more information on those 2? I think that's...
Yeah, you'll also note 4.8 at the bottom, even though if we do agree to lower risk 1, it's important to recognise that the percentages shown above are indications only. We've already been through a number of scenarios, 19.5, 17.5 and 21.5.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. But I think what does seem to be one of the factors that's coming up is the level of protection, because 20% and 30% is pretty significant. So it's, although I'm sure there'll be some variation from the figures there, that's 2 slightly different strategies, really. So, but I don't know today which one's best. That's however, I'll go with the will of the subcommittee. But it seems to be within the diversifying spectrum, but it's just they're 2 slightly different ways to diversify, I suppose.
Paul, do you want to add in?
Yeah, well, what the difference between the lower risk 2 is that we are also moving 10% into bonds, as well as the 10% diversification. We'll bring something back with it'll have the characteristics of lower risk diversifying 1, and what we can also do is find out where the funding level is to see if that gives a bit more support for moving money into bonds as well. But I guess we're differentiating between moving into diversifying assets and going into very low risk protection assets. And we're saying we'd be wary of moving into protection assets at the moment. But as part of that report, we'll be talking about each component, and we'll know where the funding level is in September. So, if it's at a level which makes that more palatable, then it's, it might still be on the table. We're not.
Would it help if we agree in principle so that when we see the outcome of the report?
Chair, no, I think I'm happy with that. I think we'll get more information as it comes back anyway. I think we need to be, I suppose, fairly clear about what direction we're setting.
So are members in agreement with 2.2 and 2.3? Agreed? Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, Paul?
Could I maybe just clarify recommendation 2.2, how we may have just slightly amended that this morning in terms of what we will bring back, or are we saying that it's recommendation 2.2, or is there an adjustment to that we're actually suggesting there?
So yourself, Chair, but I think the answer that I got seemed to suggest that, well, there'll be sort of further information included in the report that comes back, but the emphasis would be on that which aligned with diversification 1 model although that he did sort of mention that there would be maybe more information about the protection as well as part of that report.
Well, what we can look at is where the funding position is when we bring that back. So at the moment, we're not advocating money into low risk bonds, but we'll be talking about each component of the fund. And if the funding level is in a better position, such that that becomes more palatable, then that can be part of the discussion in September. But I suppose we'll be working off something that looks like low risk one diversifying, because that element we're probably going to do anyway. It's a separate element of whether we want to pour money into government bonds, which kind of depends on the funding level, really.
Good. Members happy with that? Okay. Thank you. Now we move on to item 6 on the agenda, the Local Government Pension Scheme Administration Annual Update. And Stuart will give us a report on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning. Provided the latest update for members to review in terms of some of the administration activities over the past 12 months, of which they have been significant. It's been another very busy year for the team, and it's good for us, it's good for the workforce, it's good for families associated with the workforce, and it shows an increasing interest and knowledge of the importance of saving for retirement. So I think we recognise that, yes, whilst there's an increased workload, it's for good reasons, because more people are contacting us in terms of what their benefits are, how they can plan for the future in terms of retirement. So just looking at some of the detail, I think we continue to see good workforce numbers within the scheme, and that's highlighted within the report. Historically, Dumfries and Galloway Council always has had relatively high numbers of members in the scheme compared to other councils, and that trend seems to continue. I think it was mentioned in the previous presentation as well in terms of auto-enrolment, which came in 2012. I think that has been successful in terms of increasing the numbers in the scheme. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And clearly, when someone is placed in the scheme and opted into the scheme, then it makes it a little bit more tricky for staff to come out of the scheme, and therefore some staff just tend to leave themselves in the scheme and continue to pay the contributions, which obviously is good for the fund. I think in terms of one of the messages that we want to kind of get across today is in terms of some of the customer focus activities that we've looked at over the past 12 months, 12 to 18 months. We've really focused in on our customer engagement process, and that's really important because it is a complex area, and we can see that clearly in terms of how we describe some of the benefits that people might get, how some of the calculations are worked out. So it's our job to try and convey those messages in as simple way as possible, and that is quite a challenge for us, but we are getting better at that, and we feel that people are certainly more informed about how their future retirement pension worth is calculated into the future. I think one of the things that we do is we do have a customer charter, and within that customer charter we're always reminding ourselves that we place our customer at the heart of what we do. And certainly the report highlights a number of drop-in sessions that we've had over the region over the past 12 months, where the team have actually gone out of the office and gone into all corners of Dumfries and Galloway and invited people to come along and talk about their benefits, and that's been really successful, and people have really warmed to that approach, and that's something that we will continue to do in the future as long as people want it. We also have increased face-to-face engagement. So, for example, something that's quite sensitive around death in service, even death in retirement, it can be a difficult period of time for family members. So it's not only about the employees that perhaps used to be with us, but it's about how do we support the families in terms of making sure that various widows and children's pensions and lump sum death grants are paid in the appropriate timescale. And again, we get feedback from our customers, and our customers like the face-to-face approach. We're not a big team, we're a very small team. However, that's something that I feel is really important, particularly where we can prioritise those sorts of areas. In the last 12 months, we've issued 8,500 benefit statements, and that's an increase in the previous year, and that's a significant challenge for the team. Those benefit statements are embedded within regulations, so yes, we have to do it, but the way in which we do it, I think, is relatively unique because we support the issuing of annual benefit statements with drop-in sessions. So the minute they're out the door and people receive them and review them, then there's an opportunity for someone in their locality to talk to them face-to-face. But of course, they can communicate with any other way. Those benefit statements do give people insight as to their benefits. It does generate a lot of questions, but that's what we're there for. We don't mind the questions coming back, and hopefully we can answer those for the staff. So I think that gives a kind of an overview of some of the customer focus, and we'll continue to push on that. And I think that's something that we've been pushing on for the last 2 or 3 years, and we come back to elected members and say that we're continuing to increase that. And I think that's what we want to look at in the future. Performance, we've got a few performance indicators that we measure our performance around, and I think that continues to be good. And we continue to ensure that we're paying benefits, certainly within regulation timescales, which are out with our KPIs. Our KPIs are even more strict than what the regulations might indicate that we do. In terms of the complaints, as a service with over 20,000 transactions, we have recorded 5 complaints over the past year. We've dealt with those effectively and efficiently because an employee can escalate those through the pension appeals processes, and we haven't had any of those. So we've always resolved the complaints at the first point of contact. So that gives a kind of generic, general overview of what we've done over the past year, and highlighted a few kind of key areas that I thought would be worth mentioning this morning. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stuart. I'll just start off by asking a wee question. 3.5, paragraph 3.5, where it's there was a 50-50 scheme that was offering employees 50% of their contributions for 50% of their normal benefits. And you can understand people in financial hardship in doing so. Are we trying to actively encourage these 15 people to come back into a fully funded scheme for full benefits?
I think you're right. I think when the government introduced the 50-50 scheme, I think they were expecting a higher interest in it. I think in some ways, conversely, it's good that there's a low interest in it because we've got a higher rate within the full scheme. So maybe people are realising that actually it's maybe worth paying a little bit more. But you're quite right. We do have those individuals, and we know who they are, and we talk to them. They get a benefit statement just like everyone else. And within those opportunities to engage with them, we will always push the merits, if you like, of the scheme. But ultimately, it's a personal decision at the end of the day, and it will, as you say, suit their particular financial pressures that they might have.
Members, David McKee.
It was just on the same thing, actually. I was going to ask the same question. Is there nothing that we can do to actually help these people that try and tide them over to get into a position where they can pay the full amount? Because they're going to, at the end of the day, it's not going to help them. They're going to have half pensions instead of a full pension, so our benefits are not going to be there that they would have with a full pension.
I think one of the things I would obviously say is that half a pension is better than no pension, and I think the risk would be in the past, maybe those 15 individuals wouldn't have been in the scheme at all. So I think in some ways that's a positive. Would we want to see the whole workforce in the pension scheme? Yes, I would. I think the reality is different. I think one of the benefits that we have, certainly in terms of auto-enrolment and through the 50-50 scheme, is that every 3 years we're required to bring people in who have opted out of the scheme, and that includes the 50-50 people. So, for example, those individuals that are in 50-50 will suddenly find themselves in 100% into the pension scheme again. They might not still want that, but then they have an opportunity to go back into the 50-50 scheme. And I think it's back to that kind of passive decision making. Sometimes if you have to actively make a decision, sometimes it's a little bit more of a challenge for people to do it. So therefore, we might get 1 or 2 of the 15 that in 3 years' time, or whenever the next review is due, actually stay in the 100% scheme.
David Stainthorpe.
Thanks. Sure, I noticed the opt-out number is 310, and I just wondered, is there any sort of correlation between the type of person that's opting out? You know, is it all, you know, is there an inequality issue perhaps? Is it all sort of low-paid women, or is there a particular, you know, is it all people that work on the roads or the parks or whatever? You know, is there any kind of common theme there on those?
I think given the profile of the workforce, David, it wouldn't surprise you to know, and you'll know this anyway, that 72% of the workforce is female, and the vast majority of staff are within bands 1 to 9. Then predominantly those that opt out are female, and those in the lower pay bands. I think it's one of the things that we're always trying to target, and I think through our customer engagement process, regardless of their gender and their pay band, our focus for 2018-19 and beyond is to try and encourage everybody to come in. You know, we'll continue to do that, and we can, you know, work with you through the trade union bodies to influence all staff to come into the scheme, because obviously there are great benefits there. But that kind of matches up with the profile that I think you were suggesting.
You want to come back in, David?
Well, it's not a question, it's just to congratulate the team on the good work that they did with the customer engagement. I haven't heard a single person that's attended that's been disappointed in any way whatsoever. They've all really welcomed it and had great value from it.
I'm sure everybody appreciate that. Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just a couple of questions. One was, well, 2 were relating to page 8, which is the analysis of the common data and the sort of inaccuracies, where there's like 4.6 of inaccuracies occurred due to incomplete or unknown member addresses, and there's a data improvement plan. So I was just wondering, when would we be able to see or monitor how well that data improvement exercise is going? Because obviously we want to be as accurate as possible. Second part was also the conditional data, is it? Which is 3.20, the next paragraph. So again, there's I think we have a task to establish our data rate, and this is a key project for this year, it's saying, but again, is that something that's going to come back in terms of how well we've done with that? And then there was another wee thing on page 11, which was the cost of Altair, the software. So I understand that in the year, because I remember, I think we got it, the cost went up because it was a kind of cost of acquisition, so the annual member administrative cost, and that's got a wee asterisk next to it just to account for that. But now it's jumped up in 2017-18 quite significantly, from £19 a year to 24. Is that just something we have to sort of suck it up because it's the change in the license cost or something? Or I presume that software would be quite specific to delivering what it needs to do, so we kind of have to have it. But is that a saving that we thought we might have got, which is now increasing in cost? And the other thing was, yes, so on page 15, there's the GMP reconciliation progress. And I was just curious about what looks like 10% of the number of records are out with a tolerance, or there's a file missing from HMRC. And it does note that there's further investigation required, but I don't know if that's kind of normal, or, you know, I don't know how to benchmark that against anything else. It doesn't sound great, but it could be just normal for the industry, if you like. And similarly, below that, there's 519, or 5% roughly, not a member, and that's a piece of work between us and HMRC, I presume. How long will that take to sort of finally conclude or get sorted? Thank you, Chair.
Hopefully I'll cover all your points. Happy to, I think the first point was when will you see the improvement plan? I'm happy to bring one back in, I think, September. I think that was the the date that was mentioned earlier, so we'd be able to do that because we've been looking at common data, which is the kind of relatively straightforward data about names and addresses, etc. I think in terms of conditional data, that is a bit more. That's a bit more difficult, and that's scheme-specific data. So that's more about when people joined the scheme, when they left the scheme, what the salaries are that are in the system, etc. And what we're looking at the moment, and all other councils are doing exactly the same in terms of the common data is fairly easy and straightforward to remedy. The conditional data is a bit more tricky, and there's a benchmark there of kind of 73%. So all councils and administering authorities are all in the same place in terms of doing the kind of data cleanse, if you like. So we're no better and we're no worse than anyone else there. And as I say, happy to bring back a kind of more detailed report as to the conditional and common data and how we've done over the past, sorry, not the past 6 months, but the next 6 months leading up to September. I think that would be helpful for you. In terms of the costs higher, I think there's just a little note at page 11 at 2.1. We increased our team in January 2016, and we haven't been able to show it in this table until 2017. And I think the explanation there is because there was a central support charge and it was limited to 2%. So the ongoing costs will be around that £24 mark, and that does include the costs of the system, which is valuable to our business, and we need to continue to use that and maintain that system. We will always, and I'll give that assurance, we will always look for efficiencies. So, and we always do look for efficiencies within our processes. But I think we had to bring more staff in, so we had to grow, and that reflects that. In terms of the GMP programme, that's a difficult project. And it's difficult for all councils because this guaranteed minimum pension has been in force since 1978. So there's a huge amount of historical data where administering authorities and the HMRC and Inland Revenue, as would exchange data since 1978. So this is a reconciliation of that data. So there are huge discrepancies and challenges with the data across the whole of the UK. And again, I think just to say we are atypical. We're not in any way sort of unique, I guess, in terms of the records that we've identified of potential changes that we need to make, and we need to investigate those. But we have a project in place and we have a plan in place that we will look at those records accordingly. And every other administering authority, Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland, are doing exactly the same job. Now we have to have this finished by December 18. So there's not a huge amount of time left on that. So the team have been working heavily on that, and there's still a fair bit to do to make sure that we reconcile that by December 18.
Thanks for that. I think that's covered most of the things. So in September we'll get a report on the data, conditional data and common data as well. And then also, I presume this is reconciled on 16th of February, so I presume this time next year we would be in a position, if it finishes in December, to get a similar report showing that kind of sorted out.
Happy to do that, Chair.
Yeah,
Thank you. Councillor Nicholl.
Thanks, Chair. Stuart, in 3.3 it says that section also administers pensions for 11 other external employers who have employees in the LGPS. Now, he probably told me this before, but being of a certain age, you know, the memory's not as good as it used to be. Could you maybe remind me what sort of sectors those other employees employers come from, and also do they pay a contribution towards the administration and your team's costs for the work you put in?
In the first point, we have employers like Dumfries and Galloway College, Crichton Development Company, Crichton Trust, and police. Some of the old. We still have a few records, not police officers, but we have some police groups where we've retained the records back from when the change occurred. So predominantly, the records that we've kept for the employers that we have tend to be employees that used to be part of the council, and therefore we have an admitted body agreement on that basis. They do have an employer contribution rate, you would expect that, and as part of that employer contribution rate there is factored in the administration cost of the team that we could, because we service them as well as we service the council.
Want to come back in?
Yeah, not particularly on that point, but back to what Stephen was on about earlier on about this £24 per person administration cost. Now it was £18 and 13.14, and then it rose because of the purchase of Altair, and then it became 19, and 24. Was the extra £2 sort of from 18 to 19.50 or thereby? Was that the cost to Altair, or was there a? It seems to have jumped quite a bit, and I'm trying to find out how why that is. I mean, you did say that there was a cost for the rent or the use of Altair or the computer system. How much of that is? How much does that cost per head, roughly?
The cost of the system, which is not broken down here, but I can certainly provide that at a future meeting. The cost of the system is significant, so it would form a significant part of the recharge in terms of that. I mean, I think the cost of the system increases broadly in line with inflation. So we do see an inflationary increase, and we build that into our financial planning model. However, apart from when we procured the system, so that was the big purchase, and it's been relatively stable thereafter. The vast majority of that increase is down to the staff team increasing in size, with additional 1% inflationary increases on average for the use of the Altair system.
Councillor
Very briefly, are you going to be able to keep the cost down to £25 or below per employee?
That's been the aim for a significant period of time. The costs are a moving target, and I think what we will do is we'll have to review that, and we'll have to highlight that to members going forward if there's a particular risk that we're going to be increasing beyond our target, particularly if those increasing costs are ongoing costs. I think there's a recognition that we might have a spike in cost based on maybe an update in the system, if you like, or maybe there's a few projects that need to be dealt with there and then in that year to comply with legislation. But if there's ongoing costs that's putting significant pressure on that £25 target that's been there for some time, we'll certainly put a lot of thinking into how we minimise that increase, but we would come back and explain that to you as to the reasons why.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm kind of heading back towards the same direction as Graham there, actually, but I'd like to point out as well, a lot of people don't understand how difficult it can be to keep staff addresses up to date, and I think it's got significantly worse since we communicate electronically with people. The last person they tell quite often when they move house is their employer. I've got this problem as well. It's horrendous, and people just don't understand how it can look daft that you don't even have an accurate address for your staff, but it's surprisingly easy. But I actually wondered about the GDPR, what effect that has had on your admin costs, and is it really just going to be a one-off cost? I presume there is a cost, a one-off cost in setting up, to cope with the regulations, or is there going to be an ongoing financial cost, again putting pressure onto your £25 target?
I think in terms of the GDPR, we've obviously reviewed it for some time, and we don't see a significant cost attributed to GDPR. We have a genuine purpose to hold the data, and we've complied with data protection rules since they came into force, as you would expect, and GDPR has taken that just to a slightly higher level. There are a few administrative things that we need to do, so we need to just tidy up contracts, we need to tidy up some of the data. We have not highlighted that within our risk matrix as being a particularly difficult upward pressure on costs. That's what we're foreseeing at the moment. So I hope that's a kind of reassuring nod to you that we don't think, given that we're highly regulated anyway, that we're in a pretty good place as far as GDPR is concerned.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask a wee question on 3.10. It's good to see that you're going out in these face-to-face sessions. And I was looking at the number, and one of my questions was what was the uptake, but I seen it was in the report, it was 160, which is very good. Are these actually advertised internally, or are they advertised externally, you know, like for other members that are still part of the scheme but no longer work for the council?
It's not limited to council employees. We use the annual benefit statement process to publicise those. So we send statements out to deferred members, if you like, so people used to work with us and we've retained their benefits. So the statement will go out to them, and on that statement it says communication around some of the workshops and some of the engagements that we have. We also send out a pensioner newsletter. They don't get a statement per se because their pension is in payment, although what we do include in that statement is what the annual increased rate is and what the new rate is. So we do give them some metric information just to give them that information. And we also advise them of the seminars that we have out there, and actually we get them coming along. People that have not been with us for some time, coming along, sitting down and having a chat with the team. Anything that I need to think about in terms of my pension, it's just been ongoing, I'm quite happy with it, or is there anything that I should be thinking about, or anything I need to be worried about? And of course the team allay any fears or and answer any questions that they have quite quickly.
So, any more questions, comments? If not, we'll go to recommendations. Recommendation is to note 2.1, to note the annual report on local government pension scheme issues and administration activity for financial year 2017-2018. Noted. Thank you. Yeah, Claire?
I've obviously got a request for a couple of reports to come back.
Oh, yes.
And add those on. One back in the September meeting on the improvement plan about the conditional and common data, looking at the work done in the last 6 months or so by then, and also a report back early in the new year. February was mentioned, but we don't have the calendar yet. Following completion of work done on the GMP with the HMRC, which is due for completion in December.
Members happy with that? Thank you. Now move on to number 7 on the agenda, which is the annual training plan and record of training update. Report by Head of Finance and Procurement, and Andy will take us through the report.
Thanks for that, Chair. This is it's a standing item on the committee just now, and it's just to update members on the training plan and the adherence to the training plan. So the update is basically to advise the members of the attendance at a couple of meetings, both for members and for officers in March. I'd just like to take the opportunity here to emphasise this is a training plan for the members. If there's anything that the members feel they would like to cover that's not mentioned here, please get in touch with the team and we'll see if we can arrange something. It is something that we're keen to progress, but it's not. I don't feel it's for us to push things onto members. If there are any specific issues that you would like covered, please let us know and we'll see what we can do to arrange it. But like I say, the report is basically just to update members on the current position.
Thank you, Andrew. Any members got any questions, comments I'd like to make? David?
If I could take you to page 21, Andrew, the pension regulator training. I think we'd agreed in the past that that was pretty much a mandatory thing, given that it might impact on our status as an investor with particular companies. Now, I noticed we had our last meeting on the 22nd of February, and at that meeting, it was noted that some folks hadn't yet completed it, and it was thought that perhaps that might be due to just an under-reporting by them of their training status. But I notice it hasn't changed at all. Is there any other update you can give us on that?
We can only go on what's reported back to ourselves. I mean, we don't get anything from the meetings itself, so we're reliant on the members advising us on the uptake.
Want to come back in, David?
Yeah, please. I would perhaps hope, not being a pension subcommittee member, but I would perhaps hope that the minute might reflect a request for all of the members to update the records as soon as they can.
Yeah, I would think that Andrew would probably get in touch with all the members and try and encourage them to fulfil their obligations in the training package. Anything to add, Andrew?
I mean, it's something that we've got on the recommendation there. I mean, we'll try, see what we can do, but try to follow up and emphasise to members the requirement to undertake the training.
Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, it was just, I mean, obviously there's, just looking at page 21, to the right of the sort of big grey block, I mean, there's not a lot of elements of sort of training or sort of seminars, if you like, which it'll be down to whether or not members are available to attend, as opposed to training that's available as sort of e-learning modules or whatever that might be, which we can all complete. So I take it there will be a sort of a renewal of when availability for certain Bailey Gifford or pension diversifying or there's training programs there which are like events basically. So will there be a cycle in the next year and the next, so there's always something there because members' calendars will be quite busy and sort of vary. So there's ones we can do ourselves anytime, which is fine, and there's ones which will just depend on what our diary looks like in terms of commitments.
We'll attempt to update the programme as and when we receive notification of the events, yes.
No more questions? We'll go to recommendations, and members are asked to note 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Thank you. Now move on to item 8, which is the actuarial valuation as at the 31st of March 2017 final results update. Andrew again, is it?
Again, this is just to advise the members of the final results from the valuation. In the February meeting, they were given the results as they stood. There was no change to those results. All the employers have had their contribution rates agreed, and the valuation was signed off by the 31st of March as is required. The other purpose of the report is to ask for formal adoption of the funding strategy statement. Again, the draft report was put up to the February committee, and comments, etc., were asked for both from committee and from other employers. We didn't have any comments on that, so we're just asking for formal adoption of the funding strategy statement as it was presented in February.
Thank you, Andrew. Any members got any questions, comments? No, we'll go to recommendations. 2.1, to note that the 2017 actuarial valuation report for the Dumfries and Galloway Council Pension Fund was signed off by the actuary on the 29th of March 2018, and 2.2, agree the revised funding strategy statement for Dumfries and Galloway Council Pension Fund as detailed in sections 3.5 and 3.6 below. Agreed. Thank you. Now move on to item 9. Any other business deemed urgent by the chairman? No. Item 10, Local Government Scotland Act 1973. Consider adoption of resolution to exclude the public from the meeting in terms of section 50A brackets 4 and paragraph 9 and part 1 of schedule 7A of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973. I take it with no members of the public. Okay.